Okay. Unhinged voice note while I'm driving regarding Anna Free from Fairy Tales post. So, about all of the harmonic stuff and astrology and myths and Gobekli Tepe and all of that. And, harmonic resonances. As this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. Not in the same exact, the same vein as this, but similar veins. Not to try to scoop you or anything, but similar veins to this. And I kind of picked it up and dropped it a little bit and all of that, but I do think I have some things to contribute to the discussion. So, one, talking about the golden ratio and the pi spiral. I'm not sure if you pronounce H. I think you do. Which I know Nell really understands in a much deeper way, the math theory kind of behind it. But basically, there's a lot going on. The idea that the whole creation is in this orderly sequence, the Fibonacci sequence, where it's like a set of numbers where I think they're like not exponentially, but they kind of grow in a very ordered pattern that's like 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 2 is 3. So it goes from like 1, 3. So it's like a very orderly pattern of the sequence of how the numbers grow, and you can see that in a spiral. And in just like all of the very symmetrical like things in nature and all that, like the sections of an orange and, like whatever. Like shells, all of that kind of thing. And I've been trying, me and May talked about this a long time ago. We were trying to figure out how May had this sort of like intuition that the Fibonacci sequence was somehow related to Taylor's performance art. Mostly because I guess it's associated with the spiral, and we were noticing a lot of spirals, mainly Dante being a spiral, and then also the fact that Taylor has the Fibonacci sequence on some of the visuals of the tour on the Era stage, like specifically during I Knew You Were Trouble, I think. And it's like these geometric forms that are kind of like sacred geometry. And then also I think during Shake It Off, maybe, we were just like, why does she have the Fibonacci sequence here? And also kind of, I've been talking a little bit with T about the significance of her like changing keys for things, or her saying, oh wait, this is in the wrong key, let's put it in the right key. And I recently had like another revelation about this that I forgot, but I do think you're right that there is some sort of like resonance thing happening. And also I had noticed a while back too with her, which I had never let go of, the NYU commencement speech, where she talks a lot about the magnetic, like she says, I felt like if I messed up, the magnetic pole of the earth would shift. And in astrology, that is basically called the precession of the equinoxes, which some people believe indicates a sort of paradigmal shift in consciousness, and also has to do with the separation between the two zodiacs, between the tropical and the sidereal zodiac. And there is a theory, Bernadette Brady, in her like little preface in the beginning of her book on fixed stars, has a really nice preface on that, talking about kind of the idea of when basically the sidereal zodiac is associated, basically like it is calculated as if the magnetic pole of the earth hadn't moved over the last like 2,000-ish year, like a little bit more than 2,000 years. Basically now they're like 20 degrees. Basically the magnetic pole of the earth has moved 20 degrees like over the last like 2,500 years-ish, I believe. And so that's the difference between the tropical and the sidereal. So some people, there's a theory that like when that was like the golden age, like it was like a golden age in the consciousness of humanity, because everything was like perfectly aligned. And as that started to this idea of she calls it like Orion or Horus slipping into the whirlpool, because it started to vanish in the night sky, it started to dip into the quote-unquote underworld, where it was no longer visible in the night sky, because those stars started to shift into the southern hemisphere during a certain part of the year, and how that was like shown and reflected in a lot of mythology of that time, and like Gilgamesh and the flood, and a lot of the idea of the whole like Isis and Osiris death rebirth thing, and that also is like very closely parallel to Demeter and Persephone and like the Eleusinian mysteries, which I always tie everything back to because it always comes back to that anyway. This whole like kind of death rebirth of like the death of a god and then the resurrection of a god, and that was like a shattering to the like quote unquote ancient mind. And that's part of why they're no longer, like those Egyptian temples and stuff, they're no longer aligned with like the heliacal rising or like the rising of specific stars that they were once aligned to. That's why they're like some degrees off. But that has to do with it too, like shifts and this sense of this like lost sort of harmony. And then also this relates back to Dante too, because of the he talks a lot in Paradise about like the harmony of the spheres, which is like a big thing in astrology, which I haven't even like delved into that. I don't really quite understand it because it's more of a like a little bit of a modern astrology thing, but they're big into like harmonic octaves and somehow about like the like planets resonating on different frequencies, which I don't really know that much about at all, but I do think there's something to it. But it's also kind of easy to be mood making about it, so it's hard to know like the objective truth, obviously. And I think probably they have multiple frequencies, but Dante there's this idea in Renaissance thought, which probably is where that comes from, of like the idea of that there is like God is this ultimate harmony. So that's why. Kind of going back to the Fibonacci sequence of like why they incorporated the golden spiral and all of that, this golden mean and sacred geometry into Renaissance painting. What interests Renaissance paintings was to sort of link God to the earthly world and man and say, look, God's everywhere. God's in the slices of an orange. God is in the arc of a wave. God is in, in a triangle. Like all of this has this perfect geometry that maps towards divinity. So that is this idea of the harmony of the spheres, which Dante interprets in Paradise as like the idea that there's no harmony in hell. It's all discordant and everyone's a mess and unrepentant, and they can't. It's so bad that they can't even mention the name of God, or they can't even sing, or they can't even see the sky or anything in hell. Like it's completely divorced. And then as you go through purgatory, that is the first instance that there is actually music. You hear angels singing, and they're singing these sort of like forgiveness hymns to try to purify their sins. And then as you get into heaven, there's sort of more music, but it's sort of like angelic music that's like overwhelming to the senses and stuff, and like very loud silences and like all kinds of things like that. But there is this idea that like God is basically a song, and he even calls like the Commedia like a divine song, and that's in other traditions too. Like the Bhagavad Gita is literally like the song of the Lord, and like this idea of like in Hallelujah, the song, like the major fourth, the minor fifth of the secret chord that connects humanity to divinity and all of that, and like how that can be like a sort of ecstatic gnosis. What else? So that is some of the thoughts, and I like your idea of like reappropriating music and restoring the kind of like divinity, whatever that means, to music. And actually there's a really interesting like Rolling Stone, I believe it was, interview with Gaga about the song disease, and like her talking about how she feels music in the studio and like all the different ways they incorporated sort of music theory and production into that song, and she shows like how she built it. So that was also interesting, because there's definitely like I've tried to understand this, and I do not have enough music theory in me to understand this yet. But I've tried really hard to like understand how there can be like mathematical perfection in music, and maybe I don't have enough of like a math brain to really understand that, but I could understand the symmetry of it. But there are certain like frequencies in music that have to do with like mathematical perfection, that are supposed to be like the most soothing or like transcendent or whatever. And then also there's this idea of like sort of a side note of coherence, like you were talking about in sound, and like how like the ultimate vibrations of the universe are literally like vibrations in the unmanifest like sort of space-time foam of the quantum field, and how that could be like probably the most coherent kind of sound wave. And then if you create those kinds of waves, then you could introduce coherence into your environment, kind of thing. Like, kind of, they even go into this a little bit in that quantum physics documentary, What the Bleep Do We Know, about like playing different sounds on different like water molecules, and they can see like the molecules like forming a symmetrical formation or not, or like they go all uncoherent when there's like a discordant music playing. So that is a whole thing that I've done a lot of sort of research into, about like the effects of like coherent systems on like entropic uncoherent systems, and find super fascinating. But I do agree. I think that there is like, in order to bring about this kind of cultural shift, I do think that you need to like introduce coherence, go from sort of chaos to coherence, in order to bring about a cultural shift from sort of the outside of like having a coherent system, and then having that sort of reflect on the outside coherence, because we are so in such a deeply chaotic, like fractured, like mind fragmented state right now. So that's basically to say that I agree with you.